Welcome to Inquiry. Today I'm meeting William Cooper, who wrote the book A Quiet Life with Michael McKinley. William, what is the raison d'etre for the book? What is the purpose for the book? Why did you write the book? Why do people want to read this book?
Thanks, Eugene. Appreciate you having me here. Uh, Primary focus for the book, primary purpose was to entertain readers. We just wanted to tell a good story and entertain. And if you're not doing that as an author, everything else is kind of pointless in my view. Um, Secondarily, we wanted to illustrate some threats and dysfunctions that we're currently experiencing in our political system, with the twist of fiction and the using the instrument of a novel to make points that might not be as easy to make in the nonfiction realm.
What would make something difficult to explain in nonfiction that would make it easier to explain in fiction?
Well, in fiction, you can embellish things, you can use creativity and invent things. Um, and in the story, they actually happen. In the novel, they actually happen. Whereas in nonfiction, this is just an example to answer your question, but in nonfiction, people can predict things left and right, but predictions often don't come true and they're often dismissed. Whereas with a novel, the reader is actually swept up in a world uh, that's taking place in that story, and so you can really add um, you know a flourish to the point you're making by having things actually occur in the novel that in nonfiction might be dismissed as merely some prediction.
I'm thinking that writing a fiction book about politics is basically a narrative fallacy. You're enabling a narrative fallacy.
I think that's a great insight, and it can be a narrative fallacy, and I talk about narrative fallacy in my nonfiction book that you and I have talked about. So I like how you're bringing that in here. Um, it certainly can be. Narrative fallacy. What narrative fallacy is when people interpret events in the world in an oversimplified way. They create stories in their own minds that they think are true, but are actually oversimplifications of reality, which is more complicated. And reality in the political realm is going to include things we're aware of and things we're not aware of as bystanders. Um, in the fiction world, you create your own story within the confines of the book, and it can be, depending on the author or the approach, I think it certainly can overlap with the narrative fallacy. So that's a nice insight.
Thank you. Well, okay, so to this book, A Quiet Life. The background of this book starts off with a war between America and Iran. Why America and Iran? Why those two rather than any other two countries?
So the story begins with the main character, Michael, one of the main characters, Michael, who um, is an ordinary guy with an ordinary job in an ordinary town, and he clicks on a link, and that link allows Iranian cyber hackers to break into his company's computer network, and his company does business with the U.S. government. So Iranian hackers are able to get into the U.S. government through Michael's company and through him clicking on this link, and they cause lots of trouble. The hackers do. The reason I chose Iran is because Iran has a very sophisticated cyber hacking program. They're known to hack into U.S. businesses. And of course, they are antagonistic with the U.S. We do not get along very well, our government and their government. And so it's a realistic scenario that would happen with Iran and with their cyber hacking program.
You have just explained how America gets cyber attacked. Can a phishing email actually do that? Is the technology actually possible for a security company who works with, in this case, the Treasury Department to, well, create a lot of problems?
Yes, absolutely. The the technical side of the equation where an employee at a company clicks a link and hackers break into the company through that click is very common. Not only possible, but common.
This would take us to a bit of a nonfiction world where does our government actually do something to prevent that? Because spam not only takes away, steals our time and potentially money from people, but it can lead to even more violent outcomes. What are resolutions to phishing emails?
It's a great question, Eugene. I mean, the US government, like all large entities, has a really strong imperative to keep their computer systems safe. And there's lots of technology and practices and things that can be done to do that. And it's very important that all organizations do that, and probably the most important being the US federal government.
Okay, so you already mentioned Michael. So who is Michael? What does he do?
So, as I noted, an ordinary guy. He's got a great wife and a nice home in rural Indiana, has a normal job. And the book really tries to, with Michael, tries to show how very ordinary people who are not, and by ordinary, I don't mean that like average or mediocre or anything like that. I just mean a normal person who wakes up, goes to work Monday through Friday most weeks, and likes baseball and having fun with his wife. And um, how people like that, the vast majority of people, um, you know, that would fit into a category like that can be thrust into world events with a single click of a button in the modern world, a single click of a mouse, excuse me. And so Michael McKinley and I wanted, my co-author Michael McKinley and I wanted to portray how just this person who's not somebody who's joined the CIA, not some celebrity, not some politician, but just a person that has a nice life in a small town can be thrust into geopolitical flashpoints in an instant. And that's true. That's true in the world that we live in today. And we wanted to illustrate that point.
As you mentioned, Michael and his wife, Pam. Why do people believe that Michael is the one who clicked on an email?
Well, there's a record that an IT department and a company can show of who clicks on what. That's something that can be looked at by the IT team and determined. And when the company finds out it was Iranian hackers and that Michael clicked on the link, they assume Michael was actually behind the hack and knew the email was coming and let the hackers in on purpose. And the reason they think that is because Michael's wife Pam is of Iranian descent. So Michael's innocent, so is Pam, but they're accused of this really heinous crime of allowing Iranian hackers to get in and cause lots of trouble, not only with their company, but with the US government.
So how does America treat Iranians after the war begins?
Not very well. Martial law is declared, and the president in A Quiet Life is a rogue tech billionaire who's very aggressive and very unconcerned with constitutional protections. And he and his administration take very aggressive position with respect to Iranian Americans within the United States, and they blame the war, the Michael's click of a link that leads to the cyber hack causes the U.S. president to declare war against Iran, a real war, not just a cyber war, and and he takes very aggressive measures to shut things down domestically.
The Iranians were compared to the Japanese during World War II. Would you like to explain the comparison?
Yeah, in World War II, Japanese Americans, when we went to war with Japan, were put in internment camps in the U.S., a huge number of them. I don't know the exact number, but I believe tens of thousands of Japanese Americans. And a similar thing occurs in the book with Iranian Americans.
And leading off of World War II, were Japanese actually providing information to Japan, to our antagonists at the time? And the same way here, are Iranians or any people who are of Iranian descent in America, are they actually supporting the Iranian government?
In neither case is there evidence, whether the reality of World War II or in the book, is there evidence that Iranian Americans or Japanese Americans were helping the home country, so to speak, in waging war against the U.S. To my knowledge, I'm not uh, a historian schooled in this area, but my understanding, which is somewhat surface level, is that there was no evidence or significant evidence that that was happening on any sort of material level.
Even though, as much as in World War II, Japan, or in your fiction with Iran, even if somebody was of Iranian descent and helping Iran, it doesn't mean that all Iranians or Japanese were helping out their home state. And you point out how we create a us versus them situation, and in this book, it's Americans versus Iranians. How does the narrative fallacy affect how people think about Iranians? Or actually, well, technically speaking, in the book, Iranians might have been blamed, but they were a category that includes pretty much anybody who does not look American. So start us off with, how do we treat the other, in this case, Iranians, but also others who are implicitly might be Iranian?
Yeah, well, I like to make the point in the book. Um, Michael and I certainly agree generally in this, and we tried to make the point that when it comes to people whose family themselves immigrated or their families immigrated from a foreign country, they tend to be what they tend to be. It tends to be oversimplified. They tend to be categorized, generalized. Sometimes it's racism, overt racism, even. Sometimes it's more implicit racism, and sometimes it's just generalizing and making mistakes and oversimplifying things. And the narrative fallacy that you mentioned, I think that's a great insight. Again, plays a role. You tell stories in your mind about people that aren't true. You might have a little anecdote of somebody from some country doing something, and then you tell a story that all people from that country are that way. And it can be a real pernicious bias, even if, again, it's not explicit racism or there's not a lot of animus there. It can still be quite pernicious and harmful. And it can feed into government policies that are backwards and deeply troublesome. We try to highlight that in the book and really tell that story.
You mentioned a small family can have very different points of views, amplify that to millions of people, and the problem with us versus them is that them become homogenized and usually with negative characteristics. Our group is always individual, and the few are the a few might be terrible, but the rest of us have positive values in one way or another.
That's well put, Eugene. I think you articulated that better than we did in the book. But yes, that's exactly right. And I think it's true in a lot of levels. But when people think about their friends, their family, their neighbors, the people in their lives, they see them as individual people, and the people in their family, most of all, individual people with individual characteristics. The further out you go, the more you generalize and, as you put, homogenize those groups. But reality is reality for everyone, whether you know them or not. They're all as intricate. Every person's as intricate and complicated as the people that you know individually. And so reality deviates. The more you generalize, the more you're deviating from reality, and that often happens in a harmful way when you're dealing with groups of people that have different backgrounds.
Like to slightly challenge, but not necessarily contradict. Part of the reason why we generalize and homogenize is because our brain takes up a lot of energy. for such a small thing in our bodies. So part of the reason why we generalize is to simplify them or to reduce the amount of energy we spend by assuming that everybody is the same or something will always happen. That doesn't mean it's true, just easier for us to process information that way. Some part of that bias is implicit because of our energy constraints, not necessarily something purposefully meant to create harm.
Yeah, it
Um,
takes work. It's hard work and it takes effort to overcome these. So if you're on autopilot, your brain, for the very reason that you described, in order to conserve energy and keep things simple, your brain will generalize. So in order to overcome that, you have to actually think about it. That's what happens with biases in general. Your biases automatically go. And so if you're on autopilot just floating, your biases are going to be strong. But if you slow down and think about things and put the work into it, it reduces the bias. And this is true in the context we're talking about. It's also true in other contexts. There's one example among many. There's a concept called the endowment effect, where if you have something that's yours, you value it more than if it's somebody else's, even though the intrinsic value of the exact same thing doesn't change whether it's yours or someone else's. I play fantasy football with my friends, and when they have a football player they value that person very, very high. And then, as soon as they trade them, all of a sudden the value drops dramatically when it's on someone else's team. And you have to put effort to fight through that bias.
it takes time, effort, and energy to fight through the bias, which is it reminds me of thinking fast and slow. Thinking slow is when we have to
Absolutely.
be very much put into effort. Thinking fast is the biases on autopilot, as you referenced. They take away our ability to, well, actually, I don't think they take away our ability to think as much as they do the thinking for us.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But you're exactly right. And we really tried to hammer that home in the book. It's important. And in politics, it's very important because a lot of our trouble is when we generalize about the other political party or other groups of people.
Thank you. Well, and now to the politics. So I've interviewed you for your other book, How America Works and Why It Doesn't. And you're a human being who has a bias, but that bias wasn't overt in that book. It was there, but not really dramatic. In this book, it's a bit different, where the author, not the author, Michael, which I assume either you or your co-author, who is also named Michael, is that where Michael's name came from?
It was actually a total coincidence, and then we just didn't change it. I started the book first before Michael jumped in, and the lead character was Michael Hausen, actually named after someone else, a friend of mine. And then I actually didn't even notice it until we were deep in the writing process, and I didn't want to change it.
Thank you for that clarification. So back to my original question before the distraction. So Michael, the character, is a bit struggling a bit with politics, partly recognizing different points of views, partly has friends who has ideas and political attractions in opposition to oneself. So in part tries hard to not generalize them as we're talking about it, but does have a bias against the other political party. So I do have to ask you about the book's political bias, and I should also mention that in this book, it's usually within media that they provide a disclaimer where any similarities are coincidence. I'm confident that a lot of the politics, actually, you mentioned earlier in this interview, where it's a contemporary political situation projected forward. So, how similar is Michael's point of view to your bias, or where is the political bias coming from? What's the purpose of Michael's political bias?
Yeah, with the nonfiction book, How America Works and Why It Doesn't, I was expressing every word in that book was an expression of my political beliefs and what I thought was true. That was what the book was. One person's opinion on American politics, um, and that's what that book is all about. That's what it is today. This book is different in the sense that Michael, the lead character, could have any political view we wanted to give him at any time, and sometimes it could mirror my own views, and sometimes it could differ. I didn't put a lot of thought into that question. Oh, where are his views the same as mine, and where are they different? It was more I wanted to tell a story about somebody who um, had strong views and was swept up in a very difficult situation. And some of his views, I would say, are similar to mine, and some frankly aren't. Um, and I really felt like I could be free to let his views go wherever they were going to go in the story to maximize the entertainment value of the story. So it wasn't to try to implant myself into his role or anything like that.
Now we go on to the American politics of the book. So, who is Davis?
So President Davis is a very unsavory character, and he is a tech billionaire who becomes president of the United States, and he's behind the war in Iran, and he is also behind a significant immigration crackdown in the book and other related things. And he's not identical to President Trump. He's not identical to Elon Musk, but he's somewhat of a hybrid of the two.
That's where it was kind of evident that there were similarities. There were some features that Davis was saying that were very similar to our media's portrayal of Trump. What are
Yes.
Davies' truths?
So those are his version of tweets on his own platform. And Trump's Truth Social also has truths. I will say this: when I wrote that, I started writing this book. I think it was 2022. Um, might have even been earlier than that. It was a multi-year process where of started. I'd work on it for some time and then stop. But when I started the book, Trump Truth Social had not come out yet, and there was no such thing as a truth. So that was actually original. And then by the time the book came out, Truth on Truth Social had been around a while, so it was less original to the readers.
A lot of ideas originate independently without necessarily copyright infringement.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no copyright infringement here.
But again, it is very similar, and I thought this was actually coming from what Trump was doing rather than something originally independent.
Most of it was trying to take what Trump was doing several years ago and project it into the future. Um, and some of the projections have have occurred, even really explicitly with some of them more uh, not quite as black and white as that, and then some of them have not happened and won't happen. Definitely a lot of imagination in the book.
But thank you for that clarification because this is a fiction book, so we have to make that point.
Yeah.
So Davis was a bit easy to identify within the current political system. The person who I had difficulty identifying or relating to anybody contemporary is Christopher Clay. So who is Christopher Clay in the book, and where's the similarity? Where's the political similarity? Who does Christopher Clay sort of represent?
So Christopher Clay is not modeled after an individual. He's more modeled after sort of that general category of people who have served in government for a very long time and various positions over various administrations and are very powerful, but tend to operate behind the scenes.
I want to ask you more about Clay, or we should describe Clay a little bit further. and it's very hard to do without spoilers. But
Yeah.
what political dimensions is Clay able to overcome? And I'm trying to be as broad as possible.
Yeah, Clay is a very powerful confidant of Davis, of President Davis in the book. And unlike Davis, Clay had been around a long time. Presidents come in fresh and in their first terms, and um, people in the government can be there for decades. And so sometimes that allows those people, those career officials, to exert disproportionate influence on policy. And I think Clay's an example of that.
Thank you, Will. The other background politics that's playing in this book is the Knights of Liberty. Who are the Knights of Liberty?
They're a white nationalist group that in the book uh, takes pretty extreme actions against innocent immigrants.
Michael gets involved with the Knights of Liberty. What does Michael see Knights of Liberty do?
Well, I don't want to give anything away, but Michael sees them, the Knights of Liberty, mistreating some kids and tries to get involved and help.
What are the Knights of Liberty acting on? What are their belief systems? What are they valuing? What are they trying to protect? And I suppose for what purpose?
Well, they're white nationalists, so they have a vision of the United States that's racist and um, rooted in that belief system. And they're trying in very unsophisticated ways, but they're trying to restore that and prevent things from becoming more diverse and heterogeneous in the country.
And in the book, one of the themes is they are trying to galvanize Americans against Iran. Is more, and then this is actually part of the story where I had a bit of trouble believing. Why did the Knights of Liberty believe they needed to galvanize Americans further? There's a war, several American cities are on fire. Why is there a need for more galvanization?
Well, I think that as we see in our politics today, there's tremendous division in the country. And that division, I think historically, when there would be events like a war or some significant national event that impacted the Americans broadly, there would be some amount of unity around that. But we seem to have lost a lot of that. And no matter what the circumstances we've faced in recent years, the division continues and even gets exacerbated in contexts where it might have been softened. And so the need to maintain support for a war, I think, what in the book was really important throughout the process. It wasn't a situation where the country was rallying around President Davis simply because he declared war. There was a lot of opposition and a lot of people who disagreed with his decision making.
The Knights of Liberty, are they based on another group of white nationalists who go by KKK?
No, they're not. They're not really trying to mirror any specific group. I mean, they come from that general genre, but not. I didn't study a particular group and just change the name or anything like that.
Knights of Liberty are basically regular people. They're not authorities in position. And after the war occurred, a lot of people, not just the Knights of Liberty, start taking action on their own. So, how far do Americans go to preserve their way of life?
Pretty far. I mean, you get in any kind of scenario like that, you get a range, right? If you look historically at the country, some people really sacrifice a lot. They'll enlist in the military or take large steps and change their way of life to help support the country. Some people, it's more moderate. They might help out in certain ways, but they don't fundamentally change their way of life. And then some people don't do anything and they're rather indifferent to it. Whether they're just focused on themselves or feel like that they're not going to make a difference, so why try? But you get a good range of responses in contexts like that.
And there were, in the book, there were militia groups forming to prevent mobility of people. Everybody was questioning everybody's intentions.
Yeah, it really shows a scenario where the political context degraded dramatically because of the war. There was lots of suspicion. The tension between the government and the citizens was exacerbated dramatically, um, and that can happen to a country in a time of war, especially if the leadership's not handling itself in a good way. And so the book highlights how the domestic impact and implications of the war were quite significant.
As these are regular people taking up the rule of law for themselves. So the question is, what did the political authorities, the actual official authorities, how do they change the rules during a time of war?
They declared martial law, so that basically suspended basic constitutional and other principles in the name of fighting the war.
There were a few laws that were removed, such as the law of representation. A lawyer is not going to defend you if you're accused of treason. I think that's appropriate. Um, any other laws specifically that might have changed, or what does martial law, how does martial law affect the people in this book?
Well, they're subject, like all Americans at the time under martial law, they're just subject to a much more aggressive version of law enforcement where they can be searched without a warrant, where they don't have rights that they otherwise would. And yeah, it's a scary time domestically. And the book tries to highlight, some of our wars have been, especially like, for example, the Gulf War um, in the early '90s. Very, very little impact at home on people. Certainly, the family members of servicemen and women were impacted, but everyday life for many Americans just kind of went ahead as we were bombing the Middle East significantly. And the book tries to highlight how that's not always the case, and there can be domestic implications, and martial law and an aggressive expansion of governmental power is one example.
How does the FBI behave? To be specific, I might be mispronouncing, but Agent West
Yeah, Agent Weiss, very aggressive.
Weiss.
She's an FBI agent, very aggressively investigating and dealing with Michael and Pam, the protagonists.
Well, it's more about what is Wes after, without spoilers.
Well, I think it's a mystery. It's a mystery, and without the spoiler, I think that's a good way to characterize it. She's clearly very aggressively going after them. She throws Pam in jail, throws Michael in jail. I think that's okay to reveal early on in the book. But we never, without the spoiler, you don't really know what her motivations are and why she's doing it. In some ways, that's part of the drama of her involvement in the story.
For lack of spoilers, why Michael and Pam? why were they chosen to be interrogated? Why? And it's not just Michael and Pam. It's all Iranians, or and as you explore in this book, it's not just it's people who look Iranian. Um, so why Michael and Pam? And
Well,
this is where
okay.
at the end, and that's gonna lead me to the question at the end, where I'm assuming this is going to be a part two to the book.
There's definitely a very clear sequel to the book. Um, and the end makes it really clear why Michael and Pam. In a general sense, they the we chose Michael and Pam because they're a not really nice, friendly, good, ordinary, decent couple, and we wanted that to be, that a couple like that thrust into the international political domain without wanting to be, and um, and so having them at the epicenter of this story was a really powerful way to illustrate that phenomenon.
And I suppose one more question. So Michael is the one who clicks on the phishing email. And for a very long time, Michael is struggling with taking responsibility for the war. In part, what is the motivation behind Michael taking responsibility? To be specific, it felt a bit not genuine because it's a phishing email. Michael himself did not create the cyber attack software. So, what's behind the motivation of Michael's taking responsibility for the entire war?
I think it was just cause and effect. He felt like even if I didn't do it on purpose, if I hadn't clicked the link, the war wouldn't have started. That was his belief. And given the magnitude of the consequences of that, it stuck with him.
If you, and I suppose this is always the final question. So, what are some limitations of the book? If you were to rewrite this book now, what would it some changes that you would have made? What were some improvements or additions that you would have gone through?
Yeah, well, I've really liked your feedback, Eugene. It's been helpful, and we want always, to me, the most powerful form of fiction is fiction that's believable. It takes you to really incredible places, but it does so in a way that's believable and credible. That's how you tell a really powerful story to me. So I would want to home in on any areas where it felt a little bit too fanciful. Um, you know, the world as it exists today does allow for the basic premise to occur. An individual clicks on a link at the office, a rival nation state can get into that company as a result and then cause trouble with the US government if that business has a relationship with the US government. And it can be very significant. But it's also when you're telling a story about sort of the mundane becoming the incredible, um, you need to be really careful about how you do it, because you want that incredible side of the story to feel like it was realistic. So I'd probably focus there to really fine tune that and 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 minimize anything that felt a little bit exaggerated or not credible in that way.
Oh, life sometimes feels incredible in that way. Well, thank you for being here to discuss A Quiet Life by Will Cooper and Michael McKinley. Will, any final thoughts?
Just want to thank you, Eugene. I appreciate it. You do a great job and have a great show. So I really am glad that I was able to participate and appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Will. Till next time.